And some of our remote viewers have concluded that yes, it's going to happen this time. That we and it will be on the same side of the sun at the same time. And if the remote viewer, and they're getting their information from ETs, from sources within the US government that tell me that yes, they are deeply concerned about it, and they're worried sick about it, and they don't know what to do about it. What could the government or anyone else tell you? What could they say to you? Would they tell you that grab your hat, dig a hole, hang on? He says, oh, it seems to be a rather nice planet, and we know about it, and all we need to do is name it. And then bless his heart, you know, he'd never had a heart problem, but within a year he was dead with a heart attack. Incredible race of humans, does have a future, and it is in the stars. Mm-hmm. And we are going out there to reclaim our rightful place. It's kind of amusing considering that the last time we met, I told you it was to be my last interview. And here I am again, and you know, how can I explain that?
We have gotten the most incredible response to your interview. I have to say, it's actually been the most popular of all of our interviews. Well, and nice I think there's a reason for that.
Well, thank you.
I think that in many ways you put yourself on the line, and you actually embody the curiosity that was like rampant in all of us. And you did it at a time when, and in the military no less, and you broke rules, and you kind of stuck it out, and you're just, I don't know, a one-man disclosure project as far as I'm concerned.
Well, thank you, Carrie. That's very kind of you to say that. But let me explain something. I was a normal human being for a big portion of my life. You know, I was a career military and no-nonsense kind. I wore a crew cut. When I learned what I learned in 1963, 64, 65, it changed my life. It changed my way of thinking, and I became obsessed with what I had learned. And over the years, I've learned so much more. And as I may have mentioned to you earlier, I learned a little bit. I wanted more. You know, talk about an addiction. When you start learning some things about a subject that is so profound, the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. And the more I wanted to know, the more I learned. And the more I learned, the more obsessed I became. And you talk about losing a paradigm. My old paradigm literally crumbled around my knees. You know, the world that I thought I lived in, I learned was not the world that I lived in. And the reality that I looked around and thought I saw was not the reality that exists. Mm-hmm. That much of what we see is an illusion. It's a result of our own illusions. We humans sometimes, rather than face reality, we create a little world of our own. You know, we get up and go to work, we raise the kids, we buy a house, buy a car, take a vacation, go on about our lives, try to save money, put a little in the bank for the kids' college, and live a normal life. And then I learned that there's no such thing as a normal life. That the world that exists is not at all what we think it is. And the more I learned, as I said, my old paradigm crashed around my knees, and I'm sitting here in front of you as a human wreck, you might say, you know, as to what I used to be. Because I lived in a world that was kind of cut and dried. Oh, you know, do this, do that, you pay your bills. It's not that way at all.
Well, let's cut to the chase here, because you have come forward, actually you contacted us, I'm going to say, and said, you've got something new to say. You've got something new to tell the people. And I know you're going to be speaking at the Bay Area conference, and this is amazing. And let's find out, what is it that's new? What is it you're willing to...
You want me to divulge to you my great revelations, which I'm planning to speak about at the conference, right?
Absolutely. And you know, this video will not be edited and out there before the conference, so you don't have to worry that we're not gonna ruin it for the viewers of the conference.
Well, there's lots of little tidbits that are kind of interesting to me. I hope they'll be interesting to the people at San Jose. It's been my experience that the people who attend those conferences are pretty wide open, open-minded. Mm-hmm. As I jokingly used to say when I speak there, it's like preaching to the choir, you know, mm-hmm. because they're a different group of people. Well, I'll give you a tiny tidbit, which I found interesting. As you perhaps have understood, I have been a member of what we used to jokingly call the Old Boys Network. I've been a member of it for over 40 years. And when we created this group, it was made up of military types primarily, all ranks, all services. And we even had a couple of cosmonauts who were connected with this, mm-hmm. who were providing information. Well, over the years, the old boys have shared information with each other because we've had a variety of assignments and jobs in the military. We had a couple of admirals, we had a general, we had 2 cosmonauts, we have innumerable colonels and command sergeant majors and people from all walks everywhere who provided information we used to share with each other. And some of us have been in very sensitive positions and had access to very highly classified material, and we've been very open about sharing that with others, which kind of kept us going for a long, long time. There aren't a hell of a lot of us left. The last time originally there was roughly about 150 members of this group. Mm-hmm. And today there's probably not more than a dozen left. We lost a good one, you know. Graham Bethune died here about a year ago. And Graham was a retired Navy commander who was a dear man, who had some very sensitive information he used to share with others. But as I point out, we shared among ourselves. And then a few of us who came out blatantly, purposely, and started sharing what we had learned with the public. Frankly, I never thought I was going to get away with it. I thought they were going to stamp on me and, you know, eliminate me or whatever. There was even rumors, for God's sake, that they were going to call me back to active duty and court-martial me. You know, well, I'm going to be 80 at my next birthday, so I don't think they want to call me back to active duty. You know, I could have an accident, but I think why I'm getting away with what I'm getting away with, so to speak, where I'm releasing bits and pieces of this cover-up, is that there's somebody back there somewhere who wants me to do what I'm doing, or I would not have been able to do this. But let me give you a tiny tidbit of bits and pieces that come from the Old Boys Network. There is an organization called the National Reconnaissance Office. You've probably heard of them.
Absolutely.
A very super secret group. I mean, super secret group among super secret groups. God, we've got so damn many groups now. As I used to jokingly say, when poor old Ike left office, he tried to tell us about the military-industrial complex. Well, it's a triad now. It's not just the military and industry. Mm-hmm. It's the national security agencies as well. Mm-hmm. So if he could see it today, he'd be shocked even more. Of course, I'm sure he's alive and well somewhere. So he's probably looking down, chuckling. But we are a triad now. The super secret agencies with the military and the industry. It's all like this. Mm-hmm. But anyhow, there are people who I think want this out. We've known for years that among the in crowd, whoever the hell they are, and no one really has ever been able to put our finger on it. We've been able to grab a couple of them from the old Magi group, the wise men they called themselves. The Magi, you've heard them referred to as Majestic 12. Well, they're a lot more than 12 now. Anyhow, I'm getting away with sharing bits and pieces and tidbits which intrigue me because I think somebody wants some of this out. But the story I was going to share with you is that in the National Reconnaissance Office, about, I guess, 4 or 5 years now, they had for a number of years a series of satellites called the Keyhole system. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
Keyhole. Oh, it was super secret and probably the very best satellite system in the world. Mm-hmm. Well, they probably made it even better now. They could supposedly read a postage stamp from space. Well, there were some intriguing questions being raised by a number of people about what was known as the Ararat anomaly. Are you familiar with the Ararat anomaly?
Mount Ararat, Noah's Ark.
Okay.
And so the guys in the NRO took their keyhole system and focused on the Ararat anomaly, which is, you know, a puzzle. Well, when the word got out, when the pictures finally were downloaded, and they computerized and enhanced them and cleaned them up, and they pushed them on the wall, or they broadcast them on the wall there at NRO, the remarks went something like this, and these are actual quotes. Jesus Christ, it's a goddamn boat. Christ, it's a big boat. Okay, one would say, why would something like that be so highly classified that it is way above top secret? Why would the discovery of a boat on Mount Ararat be classified so high, far above, you know, anything? Anyhow, the story comes out. The reason they classified it is because after they discovered that it was a goddamn boat, a big goddamn boat, they inserted a team of SEALs on the site. Now, that's a term that the military uses to put a bunch of guys on a scene.
Right.
Apparently they dropped them by aircraft, they parachuted down, a dozen of them or so. They inserted them onto the scene, and these guys spent several days in this goddamn boat. And then they extracted them by helicopters. And when they extracted them, the guys brought with them some anomalous artifacts, which have never been described or named. But those anomalous artifacts is what led to this whole thing being classified not only top secret, but way the hell above. And that's a little bit of information that's come out via the network of the old.
So are you
boys.
saying this is Noah's Ark?
No one knows what it is. It was originally the Ararat anomaly. But then they discovered that it was a gigantic boat, apparently.
But a boat built by humans.
Well, it appears to be. Mm-hmm. It's essentially, from what they gathered, wood. Mm-hmm. But it's a work of genius, apparently. It was intricately put together, and it's really...
And it survived all these years.
Well, apparently. The question, how many years, you know? When was the flood? The last rumor I had was 12,000 years ago. 10,500 BC.
When are they saying? I mean, I'm sure you have a theory.
Well, the religious implications of it, you see. You know, every ancient culture on the planet has a similar tradition about a flood. And I'm sure there were many Noahs, so to speak, wherever. But the idea that this particular thing is so theologically sensitive that some yo-yo back there at NRO decided to classify it, and then they sent the SEALs in, and the SEALs brought back artifacts. Well, there you are, you see. What could they have possibly found in this big wreck that is so sensitive? question arises, I don't know the answer to that. Hopefully, if the old boy still stays alive a few years, we might find out. I find that interesting, and I share it with people because it gives you an insight into that bunch of nitwits back there that classify everything.
Bill, go ahead with your question about Mount Ararat, and then we're going to move on from there.
I think it was Charles Berlitz who wrote a book, now this is purely from memory, which was called The Great Ship of Noah. And he published a bunch of photographs. These photographs are on the internet, of something that looks like a ship on Ararat. And there are two versions of this from what I've heard. One is fairly low down, and which is an enormous thing that looks like a whole lot of ship's timbers. And there are persistent reports of another object that's much higher up, way above the snow line, quite close to the summit. And I wondered if you could say which of these, if either, has been picked up by the keyhole satellites and analysed, and when the seals were inserted, did they carbon date the wood?
Oh, I'm sure they must have, but I haven't got any information on that. My guess is, Bill, that the seals were inserted on the one on toward the top, up above the snow line. That's the indication that I got, that that was the one that they went in, they landed, they dropped, they parachuted in. Spent a number of days up there, apparently. But what they brought back in the terms of anomalous artifacts is the thing that intrigued me. Why would they classify it so far above top secret? But that bunch of nitwits back there, and I've known some of them over the years. I've worked with some of them. And I think they are a bunch of damn nitwits. You know, there's no damn reason why they've classified so much.
Mm-hmm. What year was this when the seals were sent in?
About 5 years ago, from what I can gather.
Really?
Yeah.
That's bizarre.
Well, the Keyhole program was really big in the late 90s. Now, I'm sure they've got satellite programs that are even better now. We've got civilian programs that are so damn good that the Department of Defense will often go to the civilian contractors and buy photographs taken by civilian satellites that are outstanding. So it leads you to suspect maybe how much better could be some of our DoD satellites.
All right.
You know, they have classified Lake Vostok. They took it away from JPL, who was monitoring it, and, you know, with satellites and all. You're familiar with Lake Vostok in Antarctica?
No. Oh, no.
Oh, God, that's a sensitive story in itself. Under the ice in Antarctica, there is a freshwater lake, deep, deep down under the ice. That's 100 miles long, about 50 miles wide. Fresh water. The temperature in the damn lake is about 65 degrees, which is pleasant swimming, you might say. But at the end of Lake Vostok is what's known as a gigantic mass con, a mass concentration of metal, very similar to the mass cons they discovered on the moon. Gigantic circular-shaped metallic objects deep under the ice at the end of Lake Vostok. Highly classified. JPL had it. National Security Agency took it away from JPL. It's one of the most sensitive things in the world now as to what is the anomaly at the end of the lake, the mass concentration that is so easily picked up by satellites. Another top secret, you know? Mm-hmm. The common folk, you're not supposed to know that.
Right.
Why? Well, you can't handle it, you see. The implications of it are just too vast.
Well, tell me this. Do the Chinese know it?
Oh, I'm sure they do. As you may know, the Chinese now have gone into space in a big way. It never gets into the newspaper, but the last I heard, the Chinese have a satellite orbiting the moon, taking lots of pictures. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm hoping that the Chinese publish a lot of those pictures, because our own NASA people took many, many pictures. The Army took thousands of pictures under the Clementine Project. Are you familiar with Clementine?
I've heard of it.
It was not a NASA program, it was an Army program, Department of Defense. They took thousands of pictures. They've only released a dozen or so. They took pictures all around the moon, backside, bottom, top, everywhere.
Well, are you in touch with Richard Hoagland?
I know Richard. He's a good friend.
Okay. So you know some of his recent research?
Ah, well, I read his recent book, which is dynamite.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So
you know about the secret space program?
Oh, yeah.
And you know about the von Braun and the Nazis and what's been carried over to the U.S.
Oh, honey, it's
political
bigger
system?
than that.
Okay. Well,
much bigger.
But when I raised up Richard Hoagland's information and the stuff that he's bringing forward about von Braun, the Nazis, you know, paperclip, and you're saying it's much beyond that. So
It
where
is.
are we going with
Well,
that?
our original space program was all the product of the Nazi Party. Without von Braun and his crew and the paperclip program, I don't think we would have gotten to the moon when we did. We certainly wouldn't have beaten the Russians. Because the Russians grabbed their crowd. They also went into Germany and grabbed a bunch of scientists. And then the Russians have a tremendous scientific program of their own. You know, they didn't need Nazi scientists. They would have eventually done it on their own anyhow. But one of the biggest secrets of all is the secret space program, the fact that NASA is, it's like Blue Book used to be. I think it's a public relations front.
Right. Yeah.
Blue Book never handled the real good stuff. And everybody knew that, except the common folk out there, who were diddled regularly and never told the truth about anything. But the big secret seems to have been for so long is why are we keeping classified the enormous facilities on the moon? And they're not ours.
Whose are they?
Well, that's a good question. I can tell you flatly who they are.
Okay.
You familiar with the term Anunnaki?
Absolutely.
All right, well, you really have to understand Zecharia Sitchin's work to really grasp where we stand today in relationship with this group of intelligences, and I'm not speaking of one, there are several. The last I heard, there were 4 different groups we were relating with. The Anunnaki are one, and there are others.
Okay, this is very interesting. Can you describe the Anunnaki that first of all, have you had exposure to them face to face?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes, I've met some face to face.
Okay.
Now, whether they were the Anunnaki, I don't know.
Okay, well...
The ones I've run face to face were typically human.
Typically human.
I mean, they could put on a suit, tie, a dress, blue jeans, T-shirt,
Okay.
walk in our midst, and you would never know.
And they weren't 9 feet tall or higher?
No, the ones I've met and the ones I've seen aboard the ships are not that big at all. They're just like us.
Uh-huh.
So we're dealing with 4 different groups that I've concluded, my own personal view.
Okay.
Yeah, you might talk to Jim Sparks and he might tell you there are 8 or 10 or a dozen more. You know, I don't know. I can only tell you what little bit I've learned over the years. There are 4 different groups that I've encountered, and they're all humanoid. One group is completely human. And not all of the Anunnaki are 9 feet tall. They were human enough that we are related to them and they're related to us. And that lovely little story in chapter 6 of Genesis is quite true. They did indeed engineer the genes and chromosomes of an existing species on this planet. God knows how long ago. Sitchin says it was 200,000 years. The information I have learned indicates that one of the major tweaking took place about 60,000 years ago. That Homo sapiens sapiens was tweaked and genetically manipulated even more. So we're coming along slowly.
Okay, so what 4 races? Let's name them, in your opinion.
Well, there are the humans.
Okay.
Some people call them the Nordics. Then you have guys that are very pale and very tall and very broad, which some people refer to as the big whites.
Okay.
And then you have the little guys.
The Greys, and then the Anunnaki. So those are the four you're familiar with.
And not all of the Greys are an evolved species. Some of them appear to be what they used to use. They were an artificial life form.
Androids.
Yeah, they were humanoid androids, but they were constructed. They're laboratory products. And they often wondered why, in cases of crashes, where there were survivors, that some of them didn't come back and try to retrieve. And the story that came out among the military for many years was that they wrote them off. They went back and made more. Now there are some people who say, well, they don't have a soul. Well, I run into human beings that I began to wonder whether they had a soul. But
Okay,
there are two types of Greys from what I've learned. There are the little guys who would appear to be laboratory products. And then there are the 6-foot Greys, whose eyes are more round. And they're not really gray, they're just sort of a chalky off-white color. And they seem to be an evolved race all of their own. And I think those were the ones that probably ran into Betty Hill and Barney at the incident many years ago.
Have you heard about Dan Burish talking about the Orions that are sitting in ships along with the military, actually watching the planet right now?
I've heard bits and pieces of that. I don't know too much about Dan's story. He's come up with a great many things.
Okay, but this is just new information that he's actually come forward with.
Well,
and they're watching the planet to see what happens and whether or not we have a catastrophe of any kind. And whether they might have to step in.
We have photographs, and many of them I'm going to share and show. I have slides, photographs of gigantic objects. I'm talking about humongous objects in space. And many of them are in satellites around their orbit around the planet. Many of them are in orbits around the moon, around Mars. I have a couple of pictures that I'm going to share that I got from a Soviet cosmonaut on what happened with the Phobos thing. The Russians, you know, their famous Phobos rocket system that they sent up there some years back, which got knocked out of orbit by an anomalous object that came up from the surface. But it had taken a number of outstanding photographs before it was damaged and crashed.
Okay, what will you called it an anomalous, I don't know, object that came up from the surface, meaning the surface of the
Mars.
moon? From
Mars.
Earth.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the Phobos program was sent to Mars because they had hoped to land a lander on the satellite Phobos. There are two circling Mars, which are anomalous. Again, that fantastic word, anomalous. Astronomers consider them anomalous because, first of all, they're going in the wrong direction for a natural satellite, whatever that means. They're too small to be natural satellites, and they're too close to the surface of Mars to have survived. Because if they were natural, they would long ago have been brought down and sucked in by gravity and crashed. The fact that they're still there puzzles everybody. So the Russians said, we're going to land on Phobos. It's about 12 miles in diameter. I think Deimos is only about 6 or 7. And they were going to take some pictures of the surface. Well, you know, apparently the intelligences up there decided, no, you're not going to do that, and bumped Phobos, the satellite that the Soviets sent up, knocked it out of orbit, and it crashed, apparently.
But they've been doing that to the JPL craft going up and around Mars
There
for years
is,
now.
there is an intelligence on Mars that wants to limit our access to their reality. And they've done a damn pretty good job of it.
Well, our witness, Henry Deacon, and I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I'm familiar with him. I don't know him well.
Okay. He has said that the Anunnaki are on Mars in
They
bases.
are. I agree with that.
So are they the ones shooting down those objects, the various
probably.
craft from JPL and so on?
Look, Zechariah has said, and I know this old man, I respect him tremendously. He says they never left. They withdrew overtly from their activities on the planet with us, but their activities have continued covertly, both on Earth, the Moon, and Mars. And from the knowledge I have and the limited amount of information I've been able to get, that the primary focus, the primary intelligence behind all of this are the Anunnaki. The same group that genetically engineered us so many thousands of years ago.
Okay, but you've got Enki and Enlil, right? And these are warring brothers, and one is working for the positive side of humanity.
Well,
and
you
the
had
other...
this dysfunctional family. They even went to war with each other. And man was in the middle, as he always has been. We were a product of their engineering. They engineered us as a slave species. They engineered us to work for them.
But aren't they still at war?
Apparently there is still, and in some of our remote viewers, and I know a few of them, I've done a little of it myself. And believe me, it works.
Mm-hmm.
I've been accused of being guilty of front-loading, so to speak, because when I want to look at something, I know what I want to look at. The military originally trained their guys to not know what they were looking for, and then they would download, and compare and such.
Right.
But when I want to look at something, I know exactly what I want to look at. One of the greatest, of course, is Ingo Swann.
Oh, absolutely.
A tremendous guy. What an intellect that guy
Oh,
is.
incredible. We're dying to interview him. Do you know?
Well, he and I have corresponded. I wrote a nice article about him one time, years ago.
Uh-huh.
And he wrote me a letter and thanked me for it and told me he appreciated
Lovely.
it a lot.
Yes.
But he is a rare man. He's a rare intellect.
Yes.
Not only is he probably the best remote viewer we've ever had, perhaps other than Pat Price,
Right.
that Ingo's come up with stuff on the moon. That you have to read his book,
Actually, I have.
Penetration.
Yes.
It's dynamite.
And it's hard to get a hold of. I
Yeah,
understand.
it should be reissued because it'd sell like hotcakes.
Absolutely.
I spoke about it on Coast to Coast a couple of times with Art Bell, and apparently it became so damn hot that you can't find a copy any. $200 or $300 each if you can find one.
Yeah. Well, I have. I don't know if I still have it, but I had one.
Yeah. Well, hold on to it. It's gold.
Uh-huh.
But Ingo is gold himself.
Okay, but let's kind of like move back to the question because I want to get sort of drill down to this answer. So they're still at war.
They still have a difference of opinion about us. Now, whether Enlil and Enki, he goes by two names,
Okay.
whether they still are alive or not,
Right.
with the genetic geniuses that they have been, that they are, they can genetically manipulate, they ingeniously genetically manipulated their own chromosomes, DNA, till they literally have become practically immortal. Now, I wouldn't be a bit surprised that Enki and Enlil may still be alive. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're running around with a cane like I do and grunting and groaning. They got the great grandkids doing the running, and I don't know that, and I'm sure that no one else does. But apparently the factions are still divided, and the one side wants to use us, as they always did, and the other side wants to give us the opportunity to be our own species, to chart our own future, and to call, to determine our own lives. And there apparently has this been difference of opinion going on.
So when we get back to the national security state and the state of the U.S. right here and now, I mean, you're an ex-military. I hardly want to call you ex because I think you're in some ways probably still consulted here and there. We're about to go to war with Iran. What's your perspective on this? We're not?
No, we're not.
Okay.
And that's my opinion. For whatever it's worth,
Sure.
I have a half penny in my pocket that I don't believe that we're going to have a nuclear war because I don't think the custodians will allow it.
Right.
The planet is too valuable. It's too rich a reservoir of life. Not only the humans here on this planet, but all the other creatures. This planet is an absolute cornucopia of beautiful, beautiful forms of life. And not only that, but the the fauna and the what's the other term?
Flora.
The flora. The flora is infinite almost.
Yeah.
No, the planet's too valuable.
Okay.
They've got a lot invested in planet Earth, and they're not about to let it go to a nuclear war because they have the power to see that it does not happen. And I want to tell you something else. You've heard this old rumor about the Prime Directive? Bullshit. It doesn't exist.
Right. Okay.
They have been interfering here, breaking the so-called Prime Directive over the centuries, so thousands of times. They have been interfering, according to our historical records, back to ancient Greece. They probably had a hand in that damn dust-up at Troy. They took sides. There were even rumors in Homer's reports that the gods themselves came down and took sides and played in the game. To them, it's a game.
Right. Well, the Bhagavad Gita, if you're
There
familiar
you are.
with it, I mean,
filled
we
with
go
it.
in.
The Vedas are filled with it, you see.
Absolutely.
Richard Thompson is a genius. He's written a book about it.
Oh.
Alien Identities, it's called.
Okay, I'll
Get
take
it,
a look.
read it if you get a
Yes,
chance.
I'd love
Richard
to.
Thompson.
Okay, now I'm going to change gears.
He worked with Cremo on there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were jointly wrote that book on the hidden history of the human race.
Oh, okay.
Cremo and Thompson wrote that. Well, Richard wrote a book of his own called Alien Identities, and it's filled with Vedic facts, which you would enjoy.
Yes.
But the history's pretty clear. They've intervened over the centuries, again and again and again, wherever it seemed appropriate to their benefit on their behalf. And they've gotten in our wars. They've messed around in that whole mess.
Okay, but what about Planet X?
Oh, it's a reality.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So what are they going to do about that?
Well, apparently they are concerned about, you know the story. According to Sitchin and according to the Sumerians, it's a reality. Well, our astronomers apparently have concluded that it is indeed a reality. For almost a century, astronomers have been concerned and interested about what they called an intruder that seems to come and go from time to time, and they can measure it by the perturbations and the effects on other planets. They've known its existence for a long time, but they've never gone public about it. Well, in the early 80s, the JPL, the guys at
Jet Propulsion Lab.
Used to call it Jack Parsons Laboratory,
Yes.
which I think is probably where the original JPL came from,
Yes.
because Jack Parsons established it. Anyhow, they sent out a couple of Pioneers satellites back in '82, just to try to determine if there was some truth to it. And the Pioneers apparently came back with data which said not only yes, but hell yes. And the Pioneers concluded, the Pioneer satellite data concluded. So, wow, astronomers were troubled by that. Whew! Could this thing be real? And well, what did they do? They sent out what they called an infrared astronomical satellite. I think they called it IRAS, anyhow, and this was done in '83. They sent the IRAS out, taking infrared pictures all around the ecliptic, above and below. And apparently IRAS got 2 giant positive responses that yes, the 12th planet, the 10th planet, however you want to call it, yes, it's real. And that's when the lid slammed down.
So it's out there, it's on its way back in, right?
According to the Sumerians in Sitchin, apparently it is. And if you're a student of history, as one of my majors, its last pass was 1600 BC. The Sumerians and Sitchin and all of those say it has an orbit of 3,600 years. Mm-hmm. So as like many of us, I count on my fingers and toes and figure out, well, 1600 BC, it has an orbit of 3,600 years. Wow! It's due. Well, apparently it is.
So
now,
why are they keeping this a secret?
Because
you're an expert on secrets.
Listen, every time Nibiru would make a pass, it was not always devastating. Mm-hmm. It would depend on whether the planet Earth and Nibiru were on the same side of the sun at the same time. Mm-hmm. And if we were on the same side of the sun at the same time, all hell would break loose on planet Earth. Well, apparently the last pass triggered the explosion of Santorini, Thera, the volcano in the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea, blew its top, brought to a close the great Minoan civilization. Among other things, it affected Egypt. It's all in the records, apparently. There are even historians and theologians who say that Santorini's explosion is exactly what you're reading about when the plagues and all hit Egypt that allowed Moses to get the Israelites out. But if you look at 1600 BC and figuring that was a relatively recent pass, it's due now, and apparently the guys in the astronomical observatories know it. And that, again, is above top secret. Let me give you a tiny example. For a number of years ago, there were 2 brilliant guys working at the Naval Observatory in Washington. Tom Van Flandern is one, who I hope you've interviewed.
No, but yeah, please continue, and we'd love to do
that. He's
that.
no longer with the Naval Observatory. The other one was the chief astronomer at the observatory, a brilliant man by the name of Robert Harrington.
Right. And
Harrington gave an interview to Zecharia Sitchin a number of years ago. I think it was 91 or so. Mm-hmm. Where he came right out and said, Dr. Sitchin, we are interested in this because it ties in perfectly with the work you've done on the Sumerians and the ancient planet Nibiru. He said, we found it, it's real, we have photographs of it, and he says from what we can put together, it's a rather nice planet. It's about 2.5 times the size of the Earth. Apparently it's heading toward the system, the center of the system. We've concluded about everything about it except that we haven't named it. And Zecharia spoke up and he says, it's already been named. He says, you simply call it Nibiru, as the Sumerians called it, the planet of the crossing. Mm-hmm. Well, Mrs. Sitchin and I were in agreement. I miss her. She died about a year ago. Mm. She was convinced that Robert Harrington had died because somebody bumped him off, because he had the courage to come out and give Zecharia this interview. I don't know whether you've seen it or not. It's on tape.
No, I haven't seen it, but we interviewed Lucas Scantamburlo about this subject, and he's also talked about Robert Harrington.
Yeah, well, Harrington gave the interview to Zechariah, and it's on a video called Are We Alone? And I think you can pick it up at the conference here next week.
Okay.
I have a copy, and I sent a copy to Neil Freer, who's a man you should interview.
Okay, well, we're in touch with Neil. He's a very interesting guy.
Oh, he's brilliant.
He's a brilliant guy.
He's brilliant. He just recently came out and admitted that he's had an intimate interrelationship with extraterrestrial intelligence since he was a child.
Well, he's always talking about the Anunnaki. I do know this.
Well, he wrote a book called Breaking the Godspell. And he has supported Zechariah's work for years.
I have a question, Bob, if I may, about the provenance of this information, in the sense that Zechariah Sitchin's work is very well documented, and a lot of people watching this video will be very familiar with his books and with all the intelligent commentary about that. Are you saying that you have additional information based on your contacts within the Old Boys Network, or are you doing a neat presentation of...
Many of my conclusions are my own, and they, in many respects, correlate perfectly with Sitchin's work, which is, Neil has told me, he says, Zechariah really should get the Nobel Prize. But I don't know what they would grant it to him in what field. But he's such an outstanding scholar in what he's done, and the Earth Chronicles is what he calls all of his work. I think there's 7 or 8 of them now.
I have 2 questions. One's a minor one to do with celestial mechanics, and it's just something that I've never understood, and I've heard this question from many other people as well. That if Nibiru comes from the outer reaches of the solar system, it's going to be an icy rock, which isn't going to be the kind of place that any beings could live on or would want to live on. And researcher Andy Lloyd, who you probably have heard about, has theorized that what they're seeing in the photographs that you referred to as an orange object is actually a brown dwarf, with the possibility of Nibiru being one of its moons, if you like. And there's a lot of debate about how to apply what Sitchin seems to have been saying to the real practicalities of life on an icy rock out in the orbit of Pluto. And I wondered if you knew or had anything to say about that.
No, it's not an icy rock. And yes, when it makes its long journey out and back, it gets so far away from the sun that the sun is probably no more than a little tiny prick of light, a little tiny pinpoint. And if you would think that it would be naturally icy cold. No, apparently the planet, like many planets in the system here, generate its own heat. It has in its core a generating heat system very much like our own. We have a system within the core of this planet that has been described as a thermonuclear reaction, very similar to the sun. Now, most of the life and all of the bounty and all of the beauty of life on this planet comes from our going around this beautiful sun. But I don't think Nibiru is an icy rock. No, I think, first of all, that it probably generates enough of its own heat, and I think they probably did indeed create for themselves, with the advanced technology that they have, a kind of a Dyson sphere. Are you familiar with that? Mm-hmm. You know what brilliant British astronomer, I think, Freeman Dyson, said some years ago, that an incredibly advanced technology will have the ability to enclose its planet and retain not only its heat, but its atmosphere. And I suspect that the Anunnaki have done that to Nibiru, and they probably did it, good enough, hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million years ago. So the planet, I think the color from it, the dull red golden color is a result of that envelope of gold shell that they've created. They've created for themselves a Dyson sphere around their planet. And I suspect that any advanced technology will ultimately do the same, simply because it makes sense. It's a practical thing.
But if they had that degree of engineering capability, why wouldn't they just live on Mars instead of hurtling through the solar system?
Well, they weren't the original occupants of Mars.
Okay.
They used Mars as a way station, and they've reactivated it, and I agree with Zechariah on that they've reactivated their way system, their way station there. They used to drop off on Mars on their way here. So they were never, I don't think, original inhabitants of Mars. There are a few remnants of original inhabitants on Mars. There's even some indications, which I've been looking into, and I've gotten some data, that we're playing host to a bunch of Martians here on this planet. I'm talking about the original species.
Do you know anything about the original Martian species? Or have you...
Other than the only thing, I've talked to a couple of remote viewers who've apparently been able to come face to face with them, so to speak, and they ended up looking a lot like American Indians.
Okay.
And I may have met a Martian, but I've known so many strange people in my life.
And sure, I mean, I understand this well enough to know not to laugh at a comment like that, that's for sure. So, that, believe it or not, was meant to be a minor question. I have a more major one, something that I thought you might want to talk about, or maybe I had misunderstood you a little earlier on, I think, in a conversation that Kerry had reported with you. Some serious researchers, Linda Howe, Jim Mars, quite a lot of other people, are really suspecting that there may be a hoax alien invasion as a kind of major celestial 9/11 event in our sky.
You're talking about a false flag kind of situation.
Flag, yes. And
if we were to pull that off, if any of our idiot nitwits back there think that they could pull that off, I think they'd make absolute damn fools of themselves, because I don't believe it would work. I don't think you can do that when you've got the real power out there that wouldn't allow that to happen.
Not so much an invasion, but a big display in the sky to create fear and to make people easier to control. Right, Carol Rosin said that she had always been told by Werner von Braun many years ago.
Yeah, Werner shared that apparently before he died, that it was one of the programs that the government at the time was considering. You know, they've had these little plots they've been working on all the time. This war, that war, the stock market crash, this, that, you know, all these little magician things that while I'm showing you this hand, I'm picking your pocket with this one. They may have had that in mind at that time, but I don't think they're thinking of it seriously now, because I think that our so-called powers that be, which is a joke, are in such close relationship and collusion with the real power that it would never work, that they would never allow it. It's like they're not going to allow a thermonuclear war.
Yeah.
There's too much valuable real estate here. Not just this rich gold mine of human genetics. What a ripe reservoir we are of genes and, God, the whole species, plus all of the other fauna and all of the other flora. This is a valuable planet, and they love it. They own it. We've never owned it. We just live on it. They farm us, so to speak. God. Charles Fort was right, to some degree. We are property, and we're going to remain property until we reach a point where we can literally stand up and say, all right, we're going to do this now ourselves, and prove it to the universe. We're dealing with a universe filled with life, and most of it is so far beyond our own. I used an analogy one time, and I said, they look upon us like we look upon headhunters in New Guinea. Now, you've seen the films, you know, History channels and all the rest. They're naked, they're running around with these stupid things on their penises and, you know, bones through their, whatever. Pathetic, sad, primitive, savages. They're not to be feared. They're not to be abused. They're to be nurtured and cared for. Well, the difference between some of them out there and us is the difference between us and these poor guys in New Guinea and those rainforests out there. Now, I joked about that, and then I learned later that that wasn't really a very accurate comparison. I learned later that I didn't even come close to an appropriate comparison. That the real comparison between many of them out there and us is closer to how we feel about the chimpanzee. And Bill, if you allow your mind to take those trips, and I know you do, there are creatures and life forms out there that are literally godlike. A lot of the remote viewers who've encountered them, and I've seen a few of them myself, look upon them as transcendentals. They manifest as living energy life forms, forms of light. They're the same kind that appeared when Jesus was walking around. Probably the same kind of guys that showed up with poor, Joseph Smith. I didn't know the history of the Mormon faith. Poor Joe had an event one time happening in his bedroom where two brilliant, beautiful, tall, glimmering, glistening beings of pure light appeared in his bedroom. Those are transcendentals. Now, the difference between them and us is between us and the rhesus monkey. So I think I'm getting close, maybe not, but I'm thinking I'm getting close to an analogy that may be more realistic. You know, I have nothing but hope because I'm an immortal being. I'm an infinite life form. If you could see me the way I really am, Bill, it wouldn't be in this pathetic body with the...
It's only our bodies we're describing, not
Oh, that's right. You know, this is just a shell. I've had it for 79 years. I've used it badly, and I've abused it over the years, and I'm beginning to pay the lessons, or the prices for that. But if you can see me as I can see you, and we are shimmering beings of light.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Well, okay, I have a question for you because he's got a book out called End of Days.
Yes.
And in that book, he actually talks about Nibiru and the return, but he doesn't say that it's actually going to happen now.
He says he thinks it's about 2060. That was his estimate.
Okay, and so where does this information that you have and 2012, how do we put this all together? Because I'm going to say something about what you're telling us, because it's clear that you're something of an intelligence analyst yourself. You certainly have an incredible background. You can cross-correlate and so on. But you also have some insider contacts, and you also have contact with Anunnaki, as you said, all right? So where are you getting your information, and are they saying anything specific about what's happening 2012? Because I'm not so sure about Zachariah's conclusion.
That's 2060, but apparently it could be before that. The Department of Defense is quite concerned about it, that there are entire sections of the Defense Department that are working on that subject particularly. The big question is, are we in it going to be on the same side of the sun at the same time? And some of our remote viewers have concluded that yes, it's going to happen this time. That we and it will be on the same side of the sun at the same time. And if the remote viewer, and they're getting their information from ETs, and much of my information from this same source. And yes, we're in for some bad times.
And we're talking about while we're still here on the planet, because I don't know that we'd be alive during 2016.
Well, I don't know whether I'll still be here or not. You know, I'll be 80 in March, and you know, I've got a ticket out of here.
Right.
I've got it stamped. I've got it paid.
But
I'm 9 years beyond my warranty as it is.
No, but I think you're going to live quite a while. So we've got this interesting thing going on, and we have a huge crackdown on anything to do with Planet X. It's been made the laughing stock. It's an amazing thing. Really.
Oh, the ridicule is.
I mean, I think it supersedes even the ET ridicule.
Oh, it does. It does.
I think it's been so strong, and it actually has come, I would say, from the Vatican. Mm-hmm. So what are they so afraid of, number one? And number two, have you heard the theory that basically what has to happen is a protective shield is going to be put around the Earth such that this time it's actually not going to have the impact that it has in the past?
I've heard that rumor in passing. And the technology exists to do that. Mm-hmm. What I have a suspicion is that much of what will transpire will be allowed to transpire. The Earth is not going to be destroyed, and the human race is not going to come to an end. But it is going to be a difficult period of time when it begins, and let me tell you, it has already begun. The reaction from the sun is a clear response to the presence of this other body. Now, this other body has already been photographed by telescopes in southern Chile and in New Zealand. I had asked Marcia to dig into her files. I had an article from a good friend who publishes a magazine in Rome. And Adriano, I don't know whether you know about Adriano Forgione, brilliant young man.
Yes.
Anyhow, he has connections with the Vatican. He has good friends who are Jesuit priests and astronomers. And the Vatican is concerned about it. Anyhow, Adriano sent me an article including 2 photographs that have been taken of Nibiru already. Taken by primarily, I think, this observatory in Chile. But they've taken pictures at an observatory in New Zealand as well. So it's close enough now that optical telescopes have pictures of it. And they're studying it carefully to try to determine, what is it they call it, the celestial mechanics of how everything moves. Well, if our remote viewers are correct, and the ETs have given us some rundown on it, it's going to be a difficult passing. Because we and it are going to be on the same side of the sun at the same time, and that means all hell's going to break loose. Now, they have the technology. We're talking about not only Anunnaki. There are intelligences out there that began 1 billion years ago, then they have technology that puts them in a category of what Kaku would call a Type 3 civilization. Mm-hmm. So that a Type 3 civilization has the technology to mitigate the passing of Nibiru. Now, whether they do that, as you say, put a protective shield around it, Nibiru has done that for itself. They have a protective shield around their planet, which is why in the photographs it comes out as kind of reddish gold. And apparently that's why they came here for the gold in the first place, because they were losing their atmosphere, and they needed to seed gold particles in their atmosphere to keep the atmosphere from, they go on a long trip out there.
Okay, but the Anunnaki are here, you're saying, and yet the Anunnaki are supposedly on Nibiru as well, or what are you thinking, or what's your sources telling you about this?
The civilization, the Anunnaki civilization, is on the planet. But the Anunnaki are on this planet as well, all over the damn place, under the sea, at facilities that we know about, inside Mount Hayes in Alaska, inside Mount Perdido in the Pyrenees. There's one right in the middle of Australia, which is near Alice Springs. And what's the facility out there?
Pine Gap.
Pine Gap, yes, thank you, my friend. Pine Gap. And that happens to be the R&R facility, according to the remote viewers.
What's R&R? I'm sorry.
Rest and relaxation. It's what we used to call it in the military.
The R&R facility for who? What, the Anunnaki?
For the ET
Really?
and the Anunnakis, yes.
Pine Gap.
And they're dealing with human beings. They need rest and relaxation. But anyhow, the rumor is that Pine Gap is primarily an R&R facility.
Have you been there?
I've been to Australia. I haven't been to Pine Gap, no.
Would you lie to me?
Sometimes, maybe, but not right now, no.
Okay.
No, I haven't been to Pine Gap. A lot of my work has been a result of analyzing and sifting and evaluating the work of others. That's what an intelligence analyst does. Takes data from a variety of sources, but I have some information that I have been provided from sources within the U.S. government that tell me that yes, they are deeply concerned about it, and they're worried sick about it, and they don't know what to do about it, because we don't have the power to do a damn thing about it.
Is the estimated date, as best you are given to understand by your sources, in the next few years, rather than Sitchin's estimate of 2060?
Well, let me tell you something about, you're talking about 2012?
I'm talking, well, there are some serious Planet X researchers who say that we'll see the thing next year, and the thing's going to start.
I think you may see it next year, but I don't think you're going to have the hell breaking loose until maybe about 2020. You're going to have a build-up of factors. It's not going to happen all of a sudden, just like that. You're not going to go out the front door and all hell's breaking loose. You're going to see a series of events taking place involving our geologic structures. You're going to have increased volcanic activity. You're going to have increased sunspot activity. We're at a low right now. Mm-hmm. But you're going to see tremendous sunspot activity. You're going to see tremendous geologic activity. The ring of fire will probably erupt. Now, these are all going to be clues that all hell is coming, You're going to have storms. The cyclones have been getting worse, and the hurricanes have been getting worse. You're going to be having hurricanes showing up in places that they really haven't troubled us for a long, long time. So you're going to have a build-up, not slowly, but a consistent build-up of geological and weather and sunspot activities. And you're probably going to, the estimate that I've heard from people who have studied it is about 2020.
Okay, but we have heard that Sitchin, as well-meaning as he may be, is working for the government. And my understanding would be is that they don't want this information out. So they're doing everything in their power to make sure that it's ridiculed, as we've observed.
Carrie, what could the government or anyone else tell you? What could they say to you? Would they tell you that grab your hat, dig a hole, hang on? Would anything they say?
Is that what the underground bases is all about?
Well, I have always had the conviction, and I've put this together over the years, that the so-called elite, the creme de la creme, when they're self-designated, you know, they have been preparing for chaos for years. It initially was initiated by the thermonuclear threat with the Soviets. Underground, fallout shelters where we could go. We had our own air conditioning. We can have our own food supplies and our own water supplies. That was a program that began that I worked very closely with when I was with FEMA over the years. I've been in underground facilities you wouldn't believe. Mm-hmm. And there are facilities everywhere that are not known. I mean, there's a big facility right under Fort Huachuca here in Arizona. I mean, a massive one. Never come out. I'm telling it now, but, there's a deep, massive underground facility under Fort Huachuca. They're all over the place. And I went to a Department of Energy school at Camp Mercury in Nevada. That was the first time I visited Site 51. I may have shared that with you. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, I went to school in 79. Department of Energy school on radioactive emergency disaster response, anyhow.
So you went into the underground base at 51?
No, I talked to the guys who built some of them. I also took a bus ride over the pass from Camp Mercury, which is the atomic test facility there. I went into Site 51, Groom Lake, from the rear. And it was no big thing, just a tremendous facility there. Most of it was underground. And the hangars...
So, okay, first they reacted to the Soviet threat and all that, and the nuclear
It'll build
war.
up slowly, and it's already subtly begun. And they don't want to talk about it. No one wants to share it. I mean, look, for God's sake, the lid they've kept on the reality of ET activity on the moon and Mars. Mm-hmm. Oh, with the ridicule factor and the lid coming down, and I think Mendelbert did lose his life because he said too much. He says, oh, it seems to be a rather nice planet, and we know about it, and all we need to do is name it. And then, bless his heart, he had never had a heart problem, but within a year he was dead with a heart attack. When Ike met that crowd at Muroc, which is now Edwards,
right,
in 54, he met the Anunnaki. Mm. Poor Ike, not long after that, had a heart attack. Mm. It was more than he was able to deal with. The shock of that reality took a toll on him. Hmm. And that's one of the reasons why the Brookings report reached the conclusion it did. You can't tell those poor folks out there all this. They couldn't handle it. Well, BS, they can handle it. Human beings can handle anything. I mean,
I have to agree with you.
We've gone through hell over the centuries. If we could handle Attila the Hun and Adolf Hitler, we can handle anything. We've been designed to handle anything. We haven't been designed to live very long. But then again, there's another story there.
Right.
Where did you think that this tremendous outpouring of knowledge on the double helix, our RNA, our DNA, and all of that has been coming forth? Is there some connection with the fact that maybe we now have a relationship with the guys who originally designed us in the first place?
Sure.
Of course we have. We're now in the process of redesigning and engineering our own DNA. And we're being told how, we're being shown how. And thank God they're sharing it with us now, because the first time poor old Adama and Iwa wanted the knowledge, they threw him out of the garden, as it were, And that's another thing I want to talk about briefly in passing, is that there's no such thing as original sin. And that's a crock of manure that's been forced down your throats for thousands of years. There's no such thing as original sin. The human race never fell. It was pushed. And this species that you and I are a part of, this beautiful, wonderful, hopefully incredible race of humans, does have a future, and it is in the stars. And we are going out there to reclaim our rightful place, where we should have been in the first place.
Okay, and this gets into the secret space program and terraforming, because there is some terraforming going on, preparing for what might happen if Nibiru comes through and if the Earth is in such a state. We're talking about terraforming Mars, maybe beyond. Have you heard things about this?
Yes, terraforming is a fine art. It's been going on for millions of years. The Earth itself was terraformed.
Right.
You know, it was prepared. The garden was prepared for life. And then life was introduced and has been nurtured since, from the very beginning. Terraforming is a fine art, and some of those guys out there who've been around a billion years are pretty good at it. So, you see, I don't know whether they're planning to re-terraform us after Nibiru passes, or are they going to try to help alleviate the damage in the meantime? I would suspect that the latter. Maybe they are planning, through their engineering genius, and my God, the fact is that, you know, they've got artificially constructed objects in space in the rings of Saturn that are over 2,000 miles long. Spaceships, 2,000 miles long. I have pictures. I'll share next week.
Okay, what about John Walson? You know, are you familiar with his pictures of the craft around the sun?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen them.
Just wonder.
We've got objects. I have photographs taken by Apollo 13 of alien ships 5 miles long, and I'm showing those over in San Jose.
Wonderful.
Now, those were taken by our own astronauts. Now, you get the guys on Apollo 13, and they're all, from what I understand, all 3 still alive. And you won't get a one of them to admit who snapped the shutter on that camera, but the film is there, and the negative number is there, the roll number is there, and there it is. NASA photograph of a 5-mile long artificial spaceship. Now, and that's small.
Well, let's talk about the astronauts for a minute, because what's going on with Clark McClelland, and why is he having such a problem coming forward?
I didn't know Clark was having a problem.
He has a book that he's trying to write. He's penniless. He's had a terrible time. They don't want him to talk.
No, they probably don't.
Okay. And have you talked to the astronauts? What about Edgar Mitchell? Have you talked to Edgar Mitchell?
I talked before he died with Gordon Cooper. I was on the phone a few times with Cooper. He even sent me a photograph of himself. I admired him because he was one of the mavericks who had the courage to come out and say what he had seen. I've known Ed Mitchell for some years. Every time I get a chance to see him, I chat with him, and I consider him a delightful man. He's very warm and terribly bright.
Are they mind controlled?
To some degree.
Have their minds been wiped?
Cooper never was.
Okay.
They never got to Gordon. And I don't think they got to Neil Armstrong either. But all of the rest of them, to some level, have been kind of, what's the word I'm looking for here? They have been conditioned not to speak. And in some cases, they may have been hypnotically affected to not remember. Dark mission, Hoagland says, and the evidence is pretty clear, that they hypnotically debriefed, is what they call it. But supposedly they were hypnotized to help them enhance their memory and to recall. And apparently some of them had been hypnotically advised not to remember certain things. As much as I admire Ed Mitchell and respect him, tremendous, wonderful guy, he has admitted publicly in front of other people that his time on the moon, walking on the moon, was kind of vague. He can't recall everything. And of course, that's sad. I don't think they ever got to Neil Armstrong, because when he got back, he left the program, said to hell with it, I'm out of here. He went back to Cincinnati and started teaching math at the university there. And Armstrong hasn't said 5 words publicly since.
Uh-huh.
And then you have a case of Aldrin. Now, Aldrin has had experiences where he has been with friends, and the subject would come up, and Buzz would start to cry, or he would get nauseated. One time, and Hoagland touches upon this, I think, chapter 10 in the book, where Aldrin was in conversation with a few people and with his wife, having a few drinks, and was just kind of relaxed. And somebody asked him a blunt, straight to the point question, and he had to run out and throw up. He got sick. Now this to me is a result, and I've studied it enough over the years to know that that sounds to me like hypnotic suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
He has been hypnotically conditioned not to remember or to not even discuss it. And if he gets nauseated, and in the one instance with a bunch of old friends, old flyboy types, he ended up starting to cry. Now this breaks my heart, because Aldrin is a good man. He was one of our better men to be selected for that program. Mm-hmm. You know the story, and this is common knowledge. They got back from Apollo 11. They put Aldrin in a sanitarium for about 6 weeks. He was suffering from alcoholism. Do you believe that? Do you believe one of our best and bravest, one of the finest, who in the Apollo program suffered from alcoholism? Nonsense. You know, that apparently it was the programming to be reinforced. Now, why would a grown man with his background break down and cry like a baby, or end up getting nauseous and barf on the subject? That's hypnotic, post-hypnotic stress.
So what is it on the moon that is, that is so important that they want to completely whitewash it out?
Oh my God, the astronomical societies, the professional astronomers in this country have been guilty of criminal activity. You may quote me. They've been guilty of criminal activity for years to not discuss the reality of what they knew on the moon. There are major facilities and major activities going on the moon all the time. Not only that, the moon has water. Now, whether it's a natural process from the satellite, or whether it's water that's been stored there for use, there are vaporous signs of a form of an atmosphere in the bottom of some of the craters. Now, astronomers have seen these pictures, but that dishonest bunch of nitwits won't discuss it. They're scared because you know why? 90% of their income comes from government grants. And when you've got a government grant, and that's your prime source of income, you're going to say whatever the government says you should say, or don't say whatever the government doesn't want said. Well, anyhow, there's some atmosphere on the moon, at least in the base of several of the of the larger craters. There is water on the moon, but there is major activity going on. I mean, we're talking about engineering activity. There are giant ships that come and go out of the craters. There are lights all the time. They have noticed bridges appearing and then disappearing. I mean, they're active as hell on the moon. But the same activity is going on Mars. Sure. You've seen my photograph, I guess. It's not only my photograph. But there's a city the size of Chicago underground on Mars that's generating so much heat it shows up in infrared photographs.
Are you in touch with John Lear?
I've met John. I've been in his house a time or two. I visited him. I have a tremendous respect for him. The reason I like John is he's been nailed, as I have, as a damn fool maverick, you know?
So, I mean, this is his pet, project.
The establishment has tried to ridicule John Lear, and you can't ridicule John Lear because he's got sources similar to some of my own that are beyond question. He's getting people inside, feeding him information almost on a regular basis. I get mine in bits and pieces when I go to conferences and when I meet people, but John gets it direct.
Okay, I have a question for you about Arlington Institute and what's might be happening in October, because we have a lot of information coming at us about October and about something that may be planned. I don't know if you've heard some of this stuff. We have our top secret witnesses are coming at us saying, that the economy is being engineered to crash here in the U.S.
Oh, this whole thing has been engineered.
All right.
It's been diddled. This is a joke. And the poor guy out there, the poor working man on the street, as it were, is being screwed royally. But, this whole thing, Carrie, I would almost come to a point that 90% of what you call reality are threats with the Russians, the Georgia invasion, the stock market collapse. All of this is all engineered.
So tell us about it. So tell us about Georgia, because to get back to, I know the guy who's head of, or was head of, the Arlington Institute. They are sending out a newsletter inviting people to tell them what dreams and visions they're having about October, because October has become such a hot month in tracking. There's something called Half Past Human. Have you heard of them?
In passing, just
they're doing, they do language. They track with web bots all over the internet, basically tracking where a language is going. They've been doing it since '98 with computers and so on, and they were able to chart, like before 9/11, this huge raise in consciousness, that some event was imminent. What they're getting for October is the same thing, only something even more long range in its effect.
Well, I have a tremendous respect for John Peterson. He's brilliant.
All right.
I've known him
so
for
if
some years.
Arlington Institute is suddenly asking for people's dreams and visions about October, why are they doing it?
Marcia is more in touch with John now than I am. He's a computer person,
I understand.
I won't touch the damn thing because, as I told you earlier, I enjoy my privacy. And if you're on the World Wide Web, you don't have any privacy.
Okay,
so anyhow,
I agree with you there. So, okay, but you know him, and here I'm just basically, you're saying this thing is engineered. So what happened in Georgia? What do you know about it?
Oh, it was all engineered.
Okay, so the Russians, were tipped off.
The president of Georgia did what he did just to lure the Russians in.
Right.
And he went in. The Russians could not have ignored him, for God's sake. He invaded one of their little,
So what's the purpose behind it, though? We know what happened, but why?
I think, what could the purpose be other than to detract people's attention from this over here to this over here?
Okay, and
while
this
our economy was falling around your knees, we're all paying attention to the Russians invading poor little Georgia. Okay. Well, the Russians didn't invade poor little Georgia. They went out and whacked the president of Georgia's little pee-pee, as it were, stop that, and they pulled back, you know.
Right.
That was, you know how the magician works? He gets you in front of his, you know, he's
Very
got,
good,
and
yes.
he's doing this with this hand while he's picking your pocket with this one.
That's right.
And that's what the government is doing. And when I say government, it's not the government you think you got. It's not the, you know, God, that's all a facade in itself. The government we've got is probably being totally run by the Anunnaki, because there is a power beyond power that's pulling the strings.
Right.
They call them the Illuminati, but there are guys above the Illuminati that are really in power.
Okay, but we're told the Vatican is behind a lot of it, and that, in other words, the Vatican is behind what's going on in the U.S., that there's a plan, and you've got the Anunnaki. This is not a positive plan, okay, to take down the U.S.
Well, they think it is.
Do you think it is?
Their ultimate idea is, yes, a positive idea.
Okay, what is it?
A one-world government.
Oh, right.
Of
Absolutely.
course that's what they want.
Right.
And they're going to have it eventually.
Absolutely. Now, you can have a positive one.
But the growing pains,
right?
the growing pains that we go through before we get there, it's going to be pretty horrendous. Not only are we going to have to put up with this crap with it, Nibiru, which is a real thing, but this growing process that we're going through to end up eventually with a one-world government is going to be painful as hell. And there's going to be a lot of blood on the streets before it's over with. Sadly enough, that's in my opinion a fact. And that's being manipulated from a very high level.
Okay, but we have white hats in the U.S. government that are actually trying to prevent this, are they not?
We have some good men and good women who are well aware of what's taking place and what's transpiring, and they're trying to modify, ameliorate, is that the right word? To make this growth pain as painless as possible. They're trying to not have as much blood as it might take. Growth from adolescence as a species and as a society is somewhat like the painful growth of an adolescent kid, 13 years old, who's trying to grow up. Do you remember when you went through that? It was
Sure.
not fun time.
Absolutely. So, okay, but let's get down to the nuts and bolts. The stock market is crashing. You need to invest in gold and silver
The
if you want
stock
to stay
market
alive.
was rotten to its core.
Absolutely. But are you telling people to leave, to go to South America? What's your advice?
I'm telling people that you're in for some difficult times. And I say this in my presentations. I jokingly look at them and say, you're all doomed. There's not a one of you that's going to be around 100 years from now. You're doomed. So to hell with it. Enjoy the ride. No, I tell people who are interested in listening for whatever it is I have to say, that you're in for some difficult times. It's going to happen. There is no way to avoid it. We cannot go on as we were, because some of our systems were rotten to the core, and our banking system, the insurance programs, all of that, stock market, Wall Street, those guys were absolutely rotten.
The housing industry?
The housing industry, that was bound to fail. You talk about a bubble, it was bound to fail. It had to fail. Well, I'm glad it failed. Hope to hell that they learned something from it. Now,
Okay, but are we talking about martial law in the United States? I mean, what are we talking here?
you're talking about a time when you may have martial law. It's only one step away. You know that the authority has been given to the president to declare it.
Right.
The Congress gave that authority to the president years ago. I've even lost track of how long it's been. But anyhow, all the president has to do, whoever he may be, and that doesn't matter much anymore either, because one nitwit is very much like the other. You have a national emergency, and it's declared.
Right.
Boom. Martial law. You declare a national emergency, which has not been declared yet,
Right.
but we're right on the edge of it,
Right.
and you're going to have martial law.
Okay,
and
but
you're
we
gonna-
don't have an election, right?
Well, you're thinking about an October surprise.
I have no idea. I'm asking you.
Well, I don't know about that. I'm not sure it'll happen in October. I suspect it may occur within the next year. But I don't know. I haven't had any dreams. My dreams have been pretty fascinating recently, but none of them have been terribly troubling. And I know this is all happening. It's going to take place. It's inevitable. It's been orchestrated. The Illuminati do exist. They are in power. They've been in power for years. They've been demonstrating that power ever since 1913, when they created the hell is it, this banking system? The
Federal Reserve.
Federal Reserve, yeah, which is a private corporation. We lost most of it in 47. I don't know whether you were aware of that, but that was a big year. National security became everything. It became the member of the triad. 47, we declared, we made the National Security Agency. We formed a pact with the Brits, the Australians, the Canadians, and New Zealanders. The UKUSA Pact, which most people don't even know exists. The UKUSA crowd, all of us, Britain, US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, are all like this. Whoever's in the White House and who's ever at Buckingham Palace, it don't matter.
All right.
The power behind the scenes has been running this damn thing since 1947. And Ike saw it, scared the hell out of him. He met the Anunnaki, that scared the hell out of him. So they're pulling our strings now like they always have.
Okay. So what's your solution? What would you tell people? I mean, in facing the future, in trying to reinvent the future, certainly Marsha's working with people to become enlightened, to
She's doing a
apply.
tremendous amount of work to help people make this transition. Carrie, we're not just going through a transition, we're going through a transcendent transformation, literally. A transcendent transformation. We're going to come out of this thing when it's all over with, totally different species. We're not going to be the same people we were in the past. And that's good. And it's going to hurt, and it's going to be painful. And I tell people, and I've said this repeatedly, don't get too uptight about it. You've been through hell before, you're going to through a bit of it again. But once it's over, once you've made that transition, we're going to have, hopefully, a new world, a new future, a new beginning. And I think that's the end of the great year that we're going through. We're going through the end of a 26,000-year cycle. And I tell you, 2012 don't matter. First of all, Christ was born 7 years before. And this is a fact. And if you don't believe me, get Sir Lawrence Gardner, who's probably one of the best historians we've got working today. Lawrence Gardner's got the facts. Jesus was born in 7 BC on the 1st of March. Now, if you want to count from his birth, like we supposedly have been doing, add 7 years to 2008. You end up with 2015. That's pretty close to what 20...
so you're saying we're actually in the year 2015 now?
No, we're in the year 2015 right now.
Right. So
Yes.
that means that Nibiru, when you say it's coming in 2020, is actually due in about 5 years.
Probably.
So we're looking at 2013 by our calendar.
Well, no later than 2017. I'll throw 2017 out,
Okay.
and you can take that to the bank. 2017. Now,
Okay.
that, that'll give or take a year or two, because the celestial mechanics, they haven't really worked it all out yet. We've got computers you wouldn't believe, but they're still trying to feed in some of the data.
So is one of the remote viewers, you're in touch with Ingo Swann?
I haven't been in touch with Ingo for some time, but Carrie, I've been doing some remote viewing.
Right.
I've even had a couple of out-of-body experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing a lot of meditating. When you step into that world, there is no time. Mm-hmm. And you can talk to anybody, everywhere, all at once. Mm-hmm. And now, that sounds silly to anyone who doesn't understand what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. When you step into that realm of timelessness, and you remote view, and you step out of your body, and you go into altered states, and you meditate, you're in a timeless, infinite reality that people communicate. You'd be shocked and amazed at the wealth of information that's out there just to tap into. The old ones used to talk about the Akashic record. Mm-hmm. It's real. It's real. And it isn't just about the past, because, Carrie, there is no past. Nor is there a future. There's only an eternal now. And a physicist sitting here in this room would say balderdash, because they wouldn't grasp for a minute what I'm trying to talk about. But old Ingo would.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been some of those places myself that you're talking about.
I knew it, you see.
And so I have to say you're absolutely right. And it's incredible pleasure for us to hear this from yourself. And I would like to, at this time, just open the floor and say, is there anything that we haven't covered here that you would like to talk about? And then, of course, we would also like to invite Bill to ask you some questions.
We've danced around on a whole bunch of things for the last hour. I enjoy it. I enjoy chatting with you two guys. You're pleasant people. As I say, I'm an old codger, and you plug me in and turn me loose. There's no telling where I may end up. I've been around 79 years this trip. I've made a dozen or two previous trips, which amazingly I remember quite a bit about. When you start going into that timeless realm, you step into that infinite, which we're all part of. Memories of other lives come flooding into you sometimes. Mm-hmm. Oh God, the things I've seen, the things I've done, the places I've been, this life are kind of shocking. The things I've done, the places I've been, and the lives I've lived before are beyond belief. I'm not boasting. This is not a boast. Mm-hmm. But I'm an old soul. I've been around on this planet a long time. And I amazingly remember it. Some of the memories I would rather not remember, because they're painful. Mm-hmm. Hell, I have memories of Sumer. I knew the Anunnaki back then. Worked with them. I was one of their products. I know them now. And I don't have any fear. And in bringing this to a close, I would like to say to whoever is watching, get rid of the fear. You have nothing to fear. You are an immortal, timeless being who has an infinite future in a glorious universe. that's so filled with beauty and life that we on this little tiny planet couldn't begin to grasp. But I say to people, don't be afraid, for God's sake. Gather around you those you love. Spread that love around. And go into tomorrow with courage. Because you've been through a hell of a lot worse before. So be hopeful, love one another, and have courage. And that's really all I have to say.
Well, thank you, Bob Dean. It's really an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you, Carrie Cassidy. I enjoyed every minute of it. I'm 79 years old. What do you mean, hold that thought?